The gunshot echoed across the Montana plains, causing Gabriella Montgomery to flinch as she stood at her bedroom window, watching her father shake hands with Bernard Holloway, a cattle baron whose wealth was matched only by his 62 years of age. The negotiation was complete. In 2 weeks' time, she would become Mrs. Holloway, a thought that made her stomach churn with dread as the spring of 1875 bloomed around her with cruel indifference to her plight. "It's for the best, Gabriella," her mother had insisted just that morning, pinning up Gabriella's chestnut hair in preparation for Bernard's visit. "Your father's ranch is failing. This marriage will save us all from destitution." At 19, Gabriella had dreamed of love, of adventure, of a life beyond the boundaries of her father's struggling ranch. Now those dreams would die beneath the weight of her duty to family, buried alongside her mother who had succumbed to consumption just 3 months after that fateful arrangement. The funeral had been small, attended by neighbors from nearby homesteads and a few townsfolk from Silver Creek. Standing beside her father, William Montgomery, Gabriella had felt Bernard's heavy hand on her shoulder, a possessive gesture that made her skin crawl beneath her black mourning dress. "We'll move the wedding up," Bernard had declared to her father afterward. "No sense in waiting now. The girl needs a proper home." Gabriella had bitten her tongue until she tasted blood, knowing that protest would fall on deaf ears. Her father, once a proud rancher, now drank away his sorrows each night, the burden of debt and grief bending his once straight shoulders. In the days following her mother's burial, Gabriella took to riding alone across the plains, seeking solace in the vast emptiness of the Montana landscape. It was on one such ride that she first encountered him. The Spring Creek cut through the eastern corner of Montgomery land, a silver ribbon of water that attracted wildlife and the occasional drifter seeking to water their horses. Gabriella had dismounted, allowing her mare to drink while she sat on a sun-warmed rock, her skirts spread around her. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn, hand instinctively reaching for the small revolver she kept in her saddlebag, a precaution her father had insisted upon despite his belief that women had no business with firearms. "Afternoon, miss," came a deep voice, smooth as river stones. The stranger atop a magnificent black stallion tipped his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and a jawline that spoke of determination. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip suggested he knew how to use it but didn't feel the need to flaunt the fact. "You're on Montgomery land," Gabriella said, straightening her spine. "Apologies," he replied, dismounting with fluid grace. "Just passing through, looking to water my horse. Name's Grant Blackwood." He kept a respectful distance, seeming to understand her wariness. "Gabriella Montgomery," she offered, against her better judgment. Grant's eyes widened slightly. "Montgomery, as in William Montgomery's daughter." She nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with his recognition. "I've just been hired on at the Double Circle Ranch," he explained. "Mr. Holloway mentioned he's acquainted with your family." The mention of Bernard's name caused Gabriella's expression to shutter closed. "Yes, we're acquainted." Something in her tone made Grant study her more carefully, but he didn't press. Instead, he led his horse to the water, allowing the animal to drink alongside Gabriella's mare. "Beautiful country," he commented after a moment of silence. "I've been all over Wyoming, Colorado, even down to Texas, but there's something about Montana that gets under your skin." Despite herself, Gabriella found her interest piqued. "You've traveled extensively." "Never could stay in one place too long," Grant admitted with a smile that transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "Always wondering what's over the next ridge." "That sounds liberating." The wistfulness in her voice was unmistakable. Grant tilted his head, regarding her curiously. "Not everyone sees it that way. Most folks think a man ought to put down roots." "And what do you think?" Gabriella asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "I think," he said slowly, "that a person should follow their heart, whether that leads to a homestead or the horizon." The simplicity of his philosophy struck a chord within her. How long had it been since she'd considered what her heart wanted? Their conversation might have continued, but the distant sound of riders approaching caused Gabriella to stand quickly. "I should go," she said, gathering her mare's reins. Grant nodded, offering a hand to help her mount. Their fingers touched briefly, and Gabriella felt a jolt of something unfamiliar, a spark that both frightened and exhilarated her. "Perhaps we'll meet again, Miss Montgomery," Grant said as she settled into her saddle. She didn't answer, merely nodded before turning her horse toward home, acutely aware of his gaze following her departure. That night, as Gabriella helped her father with the evening meal, a task that had fallen to her since her mother's death, she found herself thinking of Grant Blackwood's eyes and the freedom they seemed to promise. "Bernard was asking after you today," her father said, breaking into her thoughts. "Said you haven't responded to his letters." Gabriella placed a plate of beans and salt pork before him. "I've been busy with the household." William Montgomery's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Don't play games, girl. Bernard Holloway is offering us salvation. Without his money, we'll lose everything your grandfather built." "And what am I losing, father?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Her father's fist came down hard on the table, making the plates jump. "You're gaining security, a position in society. Bernard can give you things I never could." "Except youth," Gabriella muttered. The slap came so quickly she didn't have time to recoil. Her cheeks stung and tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You will show respect," her father growled. "Bernard will be your husband, and you will be a dutiful wife. The agreement is made." Gabriella said nothing more, but as she cleared the dishes later, she noticed how her father's hands trembled, not from anger but from fear. The ranch was failing, the debt collectors were circling. She was his only asset left to trade. The next morning, Gabriella rode out early, ostensibly to check on a section of fence that needed mending. In truth, she sought the solitude of the plains and the chance to think clearly away from her father's desperate expectations. She hadn't planned to return to the creek, but her mare seemed to have other ideas, picking a path that led unerringly toward the water. And there, as if conjured by her thoughts, was Grant Blackwood kneeling by the water's edge. He looked up at her approach, and his smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Miss Montgomery, I hoped our paths might cross again." Gabriella dismounted, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. "You're a long way from double circle range, Mr. Blackwood." "Grant," he corrected gently. "And yes, I suppose I am, but I found something yesterday that I thought might interest you." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small, worn book. "Came across it in town and remembered our conversation." Gabriella took the offering, her fingers brushing his. It was a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, the pages well thumbed but lovingly preserved. "How did you know I enjoy poetry?" she asked, genuinely surprised. Grant's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You speak like someone who values words." "And there's a certain look people get when they're trapped. I recognize it because I've worn it myself. Books can be an escape when nothing else is." His perception unsettled her. "I'm not trapped, Mr. Blackwood, aren't you?" His question was gentle, not accusatory. "Word travels fast on the range. They say you're to marry Bernard Holloway." Gabriella's chin lifted. "It's a beneficial arrangement. For whom?" Grant's gaze was steady. "Forgive my boldness, Miss Montgomery, but Bernard Holloway is known for collecting beautiful things and keeping them under lock and key. His first wife rarely left the ranch in the 15 years before her passing." The confirmation of her fears made Gabriella's chest tighten. "I have no choice." "My father's debt. There are always choices," Grant interrupted. "Sometimes we just can't see them through the fog of obligation." "Easy words from a man who answers to no one," she retorted, though without real heat. Grant laughed, a rich sound that seemed to warm the air between them. "I answer to plenty trail bosses, ranch foremen, my own conscience, but I understand your point." He stepped closer, close enough that Gabriella could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "All I'm saying is that a cage is still a cage, no matter how gilded its bars. And you strike me as someone who was born to fly free." His words resonated with something deep inside her, a truth she had been trying to deny. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Blackwood, but my path is set. For now, he conceded. But paths can change, Miss Montgomery. Mine did. How so? Despite herself, Gabriella was curious. Grant's expression grew distant. I was heading for a life I didn't choose, following my father into law back east. One night I realized I'd rather die under open sky than live trapped between four walls, so I left. Haven't regretted it once. That sounds like rebellion, not responsibility, Gabriella observed. Perhaps, Grant acknowledged. But isn't there responsibility in being true to yourself as well, in not living a lie that will eventually poison everyone around you? His question lingered between them, unanswerable in its simplicity and wisdom. I should go, Gabriella said finally, clutching the book to her chest. Thank you for this. I'll return it when I've finished. Grant shook his head. Keep it. Consider it a gift from one wandering soul to another. As Gabriella rode home, she felt the weight of the book against her heart, a small rebellion tucked beneath her riding jacket. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Bernard visited twice, bringing gifts that Gabriella accepted with hollow thanks: a gold locket, a silk shawl, items meant to adorn rather than fulfill. Each time he took her hand, his thumb would stroke her palm in a way that made her skin crawl, a possessive gesture that spoke of ownership rather than affection. You'll want for nothing, he promised, his breath hot against her ear. My home will be yours to manage, though I've certain expectations about how a wife should conduct herself. Those expectations became clearer when he presented her with a list of household regulations that would govern her behavior as Mrs. Holloway when she could leave the property rarely, whom she could visit only those he approved, how the servants were to be managed with his oversight. It's for your protection, Bernard insisted when he saw her blanch at the restrictions. A young wife needs guidance, structure. You'll come to appreciate it in time. Gabriella doubted that very much, but she smiled thinly and nodded, the image of Grant Blackwood's storm-gray eyes flashing unbidden in her mind. She had not seen him since their encounter at the creek, though she had taken to riding out each morning, the Dickinson collection tucked safely in her saddlebag. She told herself she was not looking for him, merely enjoying her last days of freedom, but her heart knew the truth. 3 days before the wedding, Gabriella rode to Silver Creek for final fittings on her wedding dress, a garment her mother had begun before her illness, and that the local seamstress, Mrs. Whittaker, had completed. The dress was beautiful, ivory satin with a cascade of lace that had been shipped all the way from Boston at Bernard's expense. You'll be the most beautiful bride Silver Creek has ever seen, Mrs. Whittaker declared as Gabriella stood on the fitting stool, the heavy fabric settling around her like a shroud. Thank you, Gabriella murmured, avoiding her reflection in the mirror. She didn't want to see the lie she was about to become. After the fitting, Gabriella decided to visit her mother's grave before returning home. The small cemetery lay on a hill overlooking the town, a peaceful spot where wildflowers grew between the markers. She knelt beside the simple stone, tracing her mother's name with trembling fingers. I'm trying to be strong, Mama, she whispered. To do what's right for Father, for our family, but I'm so afraid. The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, brought tears to her eyes. She had been holding them back for so long that once they started, she couldn't stop. Sobs racked her body as she knelt in the grass, the full weight of her impending fate crashing down upon her. Miss Montgomery, the gentle voice behind her made Gabriella freeze. Hastily wiping her tears, she turned to find Grant Blackwood standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. I'm sorry to intrude, he said softly. I saw your horse tied at the cemetery gate and he trailed off, clearly uncertain whether to approach or leave her to her grief. It's all right, Gabriella managed, rising to her feet and brushing grass from her skirts. I was just visiting my mother, Grant nodded, understanding in his eyes. I lost my mother young as well. It never stops hurting, does it? No, Gabriella agreed. Especially when you need their guidance most. He stepped closer, concern etched on his features. You've been crying. It wasn't a question, and Gabriella didn't bother to deny it. The wedding is in 3 days, she said simply. Grant's expression darkened. And is that what your mother would want for you? To marry a man you fear? How do you? It's in your eyes, Grant interrupted gently. Every time his name is mentioned, I've seen that look before on the faces of women trapped in lives they didn't choose. Gabriella looked away, unable to bear the compassion in his gaze. What choice do I have? My father's ranch is mortgaged to the hilt. Without Bernard's money, he'll lose everything. And you'll lose yourself, Grant countered. Is that truly the only solution? To sacrifice your life for land and cattle. His directness should have offended her, but instead it cut through the fog of resignation that had enveloped her since her mother's death. What would you have me do? She asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Run away. Abandon my father to his creditors, if necessary, Grant said without hesitation, though I suspect there might be other options if we looked hard enough. The "we" in his statement hung between them, a dangerous and tempting possibility. Why do you care what happens to me? Gabriella asked, genuinely puzzled by his interest. We're practically strangers, Grant's expression softened. I don't rightly know, he admitted. Except that from the moment I saw you by that creek, something told me you were important, that our meeting wasn't chance. The sincerity in his voice made Gabriella's heart flutter treacherously. Mr. Blackwood, Grant, he corrected again. Please, Grant, she conceded. Whatever you're suggesting is impossible. The arrangements are made, invitations sent. Bernard has paid my father a substantial advance on the dowry. Money can be repaid, Grant argued. But years of your life trapped in a loveless marriage to a controlling man, that debt can never be settled. His words resonated with a truth Gabriella had been trying to ignore. Even if I wanted to consider alternatives, she said carefully, what could possibly be done in 3 days? Grant's eyes lit with a determination that was both frightening and exhilarating. Give me until tomorrow, meet me at the creek at dawn. If I haven't found a solution by then, I'll trouble you no more. Gabriella hesitated, aware that even this conversation was a betrayal of her agreement with Bernard. But the thought of returning to a life mapped out by another's hand, of never feeling the rush of choice again, was suddenly unbearable. Dawn, she agreed, scarcely believing her own daring. But I promise nothing beyond listening to what you have to say. Grant's smile was like the breaking of chains. That's all I ask, Miss Montgomery. Gabriella, she corrected softly. If I'm to call you Grant, then you must use my given name. Gabriella, he repeated, the name sounding like a prayer on his lips. Until tomorrow. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and felt a tremor of something long dormant within her chest hope, dangerous and bright as wildfire. That night, Gabriella lay awake, listening to her father's snores from the next room and turning over possibilities in her mind. What could Grant possibly suggest that would solve their financial problems without her marriage to Bernard? And even if there was a solution, would she have the courage to seize it? The face of her mother swam before her mind's eye, not the hollow-cheeked specter of her final days, but the vibrant woman who had taught Gabriella to ride bareback and read Shakespeare beneath the stars. What would she advise? Follow your heart, she seemed to whisper. I never wanted this for you. When dawn painted the eastern sky with fingers of gold and rose, Gabriella was already dressed and slipping from the house, a small pack of essentials hidden beneath her riding cloak. She told herself it was merely precautionary, that she wasn't really planning to flee, but the weight of the bundle felt like possibility against her back. The creek was shrouded in early morning mist when she arrived, giving the landscape an otherworldly quality. For a moment, Gabriella feared Grant wouldn't come, that his promises of the previous day had been nothing but empty words. Then she heard the soft nickering of a horse, followed by the measured tread of boots on damp earth. Grant emerged from the mist like a figure from a dream, leading not only his black stallion but also a sturdy pack mule laden with supplies. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. I said I would, Gabriella replied, dismounting to stand before him. Though I see you've made certain assumptions about the outcome of our conversation, Grant had the grace to look sheepish. Not assumptions, preparations, there's a difference. And what exactly have you prepared for? Taking a deep breath, Grant reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. I spent yesterday in town making inquiries. Your father's debt to the bank stands at just over $2,000, a sum that would wipe out most men, but not impossible to overcome. Gabriella's eyes widened. How did you learn this? The bank manager is more loose-lipped after a few whiskeys, Grant admitted. But that's beside the point. I've drafted a proposal, a legitimate business arrangement that could save your father's ranch without sacrificing your freedom. He handed her the document, which she unfolded with trembling fingers. It outlined a partnership agreement whereby Grant would invest his savings, nearly $1,500, into the Montgomery ranch in exchange for a quarter share of the operation and a position as foreman. This is substantial, Gabriella said, scanning the terms. But it still leaves us $500 short, and why would you invest in a failing ranch? Because it's not failing, it's mismanaged, Grant replied frankly. Your father was once one of the best ranchers in the territory before grief and whiskey took hold. With proper management and some hard work, Montgomery land could be productive again. His confidence was both flattering and puzzling. You hardly know our operation. I've done my research, Grant countered. Talked to neighboring ranchers, studied the land. The water rights alone are worth fighting for. As for the remaining $500, I've arranged for a bank draft from my uncle in Denver. It should arrive within the week. Gabriella stared at him, astonished by the thoroughness of his plan. Why would you do this? Invest your life savings in a stranger's ranch? Grant's gaze was steady. Because I believe in second chances. Your father deserves one, and so do you. The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. Bernard won't simply step aside. He wants this marriage, wants me as much as he wants the land. That's why timing is crucial, Grant acknowledged. If we present this alternative to your father today with the initial investment in hand, he might be persuaded before Bernard can intervene. And if he refuses, Grant's expression grew solemn. Then we move to Plan B, which is, we leave, he said simply. Tonight, I have friends in Wyoming who would help us disappear until we can establish ourselves elsewhere. The boldness of his suggestion left Gabriella speechless. You're proposing that I run away with you, a man I barely know. I'm proposing that you choose freedom, Grant corrected. Whether that includes me or not is entirely your decision. I've arranged for enough funds to send you to relatives back east if that's what you prefer. His selflessness was unexpected and deeply moving. You would help me escape, even if it meant never seeing me again. Grant's smile was tinged with sadness. I'd rather know you were free and happy elsewhere than trapped in a gilded cage where I could occasionally glimpse you through the bars. Gabriella studied him, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only an earnestness that resonated with her own desperate hope. Let's try your first plan, she decided. My father may be stubborn and broken, but he's not a monster. If there's truly a way to save the ranch without this marriage, he might listen. Relief washed over Grant's features. I was hoping you'd say that, but we should move quickly before Bernard makes his usual morning visit. They rode back to the Montgomery ranch side by side, the morning sun burning away the mist as they formulated their approach. Gabriella felt a curious lightness in her chest, as though merely making a choice, any choice, had already lifted a portion of her burden. William Montgomery was at the breakfast table when they entered, bleary-eyed and unshaven. He looked up in surprise at the sight of his daughter accompanied by a strange man. Father, Gabriella began, her voice steadier than she felt, this is Grant Blackwood. He has a business proposition that I think you should hear. William's bloodshot eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of proposition? One that could save the ranch without selling your daughter to Bernard Holloway, Grant said bluntly, placing the document and a heavy pouch of coins on the table. For the next hour, Grant outlined his proposal while William listened with increasing sobriety, the shock of the alternative seeming to clear his alcohol-fogged mind. He asked pointed questions about Grant's experience, his plans for the ranch, the terms of the partnership. You'd be answerable to me, William clarified. This would still be Montgomery land. Of course, Grant agreed. I'm offering investment and labor, not a takeover, but I would expect my voice to be heard in major decisions. William's gaze shifted to his daughter. And what's your interest in all this, young man? Don't tell me it's purely business. Grant met his gaze unflinchingly. My interest is in seeing justice done. Your daughter deserves better than to be bartered away to settle a debt. And you think you're better? William challenged. I think she deserves the right to choose, Grant countered, something Bernard Holloway has never offered. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Gabriella held her breath, watching her father's face as he wrestled with pride, practicality, and paternal concern. Bernard won't take this lying down, William finally said. He's invested too much in this marriage both financially and in terms of his reputation. Let me worry about Bernard, Grant replied. All I'm asking is that you consider this alternative, for Gabriella's sake, if not your own. William's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter. For the first time in months, he seemed to truly see her not as a commodity to be traded, but as his child with hopes and fears of her own. What do you want, Gabby? He asked, using the childhood nickname that had been abandoned after her mother's death. Tears pricked at Gabriella's eyes at the unexpected tenderness. I want to stay here on our land, she said honestly, but not as Bernard's wife, not as anyone's possession. William nodded slowly, a decision crystallizing in his eyes. I'll need to review these terms more carefully, and I'll want references, Blackwood proof that you're the rancher you claim to be. I've brought letters from previous employers, Grant said, producing several folded papers from his coat, and the bank in Silver Creek can verify my deposits. This doesn't solve everything immediately, William cautioned. Bernard has already paid $500 as an advance on the dowry. We'd need to return that. My bank draft from Denver will cover it, Grant assured him. In the meantime, my initial investment should be enough to keep the creditors at bay. William ran a hand through his graying hair, the weight of months of bad decisions evident in the slump of his shoulders. I've made a mess of things, haven't I? He murmured, more to himself than to them. Gabriella reached across the table to cover his hand with hers. We can fix it, Father. Together, the moment of connection was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Gabriella's heart sank as she recognized the cadence of Bernard's expensive thoroughbred. It's him, she breathed. William's expression hardened with resolve. Let me handle this, he said, rising from the table with more purpose than Gabriella had seen in months. You two stay here. They watched through the window as William strode out to meet Bernard, who was dismounting with the help of one of his ranch hands. Though they couldn't hear the conversation, the increasingly agitated gestures from both men told their own story. This isn't going well, Gabriella murmured, anxiety tightening her chest. Grant moved closer, his presence reassuring. Your father is standing his ground, that's a good sign. The confrontation outside escalated, Bernard's face reddening with anger as he jabbed a finger toward the house. William shook his head firmly, positioning himself between Bernard and the door. Suddenly, Bernard's hand moved to his hip, where a revolver gleamed in the morning sun. William stepped back, hands raised placatingly. He's threatening my father, Gabriella gasped, moving toward the door. Grant caught her arm. Wait, he said, already reaching for his own weapon. Let me go first. Before either could move, the front door burst open and Bernard stormed in, his face a mask of fury. He stopped short at the sight of Gabriella standing next to Grant, comprehension dawning in his cold eyes. So this is the reason for the sudden change of heart, he sneered. You found yourself a younger stallion to ride. Gabriella flinched at the crudeness, but Grant's voice was level when he responded. Mr. Holloway, this is a business matter between you and Mr. Montgomery. There's no need for insults or threats. Bernard's gaze raked over Grant with contempt. Business matter? You're trying to steal my fiancée, boy. That's a personal matter where I come from. William entered behind Bernard, his expression grim but determined. Nobody's stealing anything, Bernard. I'm simply reconsidering our arrangement in light of a better offer. Better offer. Bernard's laugh was ugly. From this saddle tramp, don't be a fool, William. You owe the bank $2,000. They'll take your land by the end of the month without my intervention. Mr. Blackwood has proposed a partnership that would inject immediate capital into the ranch, William explained with surprising dignity. Enough to satisfy the bank until we can turn things around. Bernard's eyes narrowed dangerously. A partnership, I see. He turned to Gabriella, who straightened her spine under his scrutiny. And what's your role in this new arrangement, my dear? Will you be warming this cowboy's bed instead of mine? Grant tensed beside her, but Gabriella laid a restraining hand on his arm. My role is as my father's daughter and this ranch's rightful heir, she said clearly, not as anyone's purchased bride. The directness of her response seemed to surprise Bernard, who had clearly expected tears or pleading. His jaw worked as he reassessed the situation. The advance, he said finally, addressing William. I've already paid $500 toward the dowry. I expect that returned with interest. You'll have it by the end of the week, William promised. In full, Bernard's gaze swung back to Grant, measuring him with cold calculation. You're making a powerful enemy, Blackwood. I hope she's worth it. This isn't about worth, Mr. Holloway, Grant replied evenly. It's about right and wrong. Miss Montgomery isn't property to be traded. A tense silence stretched between the men, broken only when Bernard gave a curt nod and turned to leave. At the door, he paused, looking back at Gabriella with a mixture of anger and something like wounded pride. You'll regret this choice, girl, he said softly. When the bank forecloses and your precious cowboy moves on to greener pastures, remember that I offered you security. I'll take freedom over security any day, Gabriella responded, surprised by her own boldness. Bernard's expression darkened, but he said nothing more, merely stormed out to where his horse waited. They watched from the window as he mounted and galloped away, his ranch hands struggling to keep pace. When the dust had settled, William turned to face Grant and Gabriella, his expression a complex mixture of relief, uncertainty, and the first stirrings of hope. Well, he said, running a hand through his hair, I guess we're partners now, Blackwood, God help us all. The weeks that followed were a flurry of activity at the Montgomery ranch. True to his word, Grant's bank draft arrived from Denver, allowing them to repay Bernard's advance and begin addressing the most pressing debts. Grant moved into the ranch's small foreman's cabin and immediately set to work assessing the operation's strengths and weaknesses. What he found confirmed his initial impression. The land was good, the water rights valuable, but years of William's neglect had left the cattle herd diminished and the infrastructure in disrepair. With Gabriella's help, Grant developed a plan to rebuild, starting with essential repairs to fences and outbuildings. William, perhaps shamed into sobriety by Grant's tireless work ethic, began drinking less and contributing more. Though initially resistant to some of Grant's modern ideas about cattle breeding and range management, he gradually came to respect the younger man's knowledge. For Gabriella, the transformation was both external and internal. Free from the looming specter of marriage to Bernard, she threw herself into ranch work with enthusiasm, riding alongside Grant to check fence lines and move cattle. Her capable hands turned to account books in the evenings, bringing order to years of chaotic record-keeping. You have a head for figures, Grant observed one night as they sat at the kitchen table, lamplight pooling around ledgers and invoices. Better than most men I've known, Gabriella smiled, pleased by the genuine admiration in his voice. My mother taught me. She always said a woman should understand business, even if society didn't expect it of her. She was a wise woman, Grant replied, and you're very much her daughter. Their eyes met across the table, and Gabriella felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Over the weeks of working together, her initial gratitude toward Grant had deepened into something more complex and powerful. She admired his integrity, his work ethic, the gentle way he handled skittish horses and frightened calves. She found herself looking for reasons to be near him, treasuring the moments when their hands would accidentally touch or when his gaze would linger on her a moment longer than necessary. But Grant had been scrupulously proper in his behavior, never overstepping the boundaries of their business relationship. Sometimes Gabriella wondered if she had imagined the spark between them that day at the cemetery, if his assistance had been motivated purely by principle rather than any personal interest in her. As spring gave way to summer, the ranch began to show signs of revival. New calves strengthened the herd, repaired fences secured the boundaries, and word came from the bank that they were satisfied with the progress on the debt repayment. Even William seemed rejuvenated, regaining some of the strength and purpose that grief and alcohol had eroded. One evening in late July, Gabriella found Grant sitting on the porch of his cabin, whittling a piece of wood as the sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson. She approached with 2 cups of coffee, offering one as she sat beside him on the rough-hewn bench. "Thank you," he said, setting aside his carving to accept the cup. "Perfect timing." "What are you making?" she asked, nodding toward the wood in his lap. Grant picked up the half-formed figure. "A horse, not very good, I'm afraid. My father used to whittle in the evenings." Said it helped him think. "And what are you thinking about?" Gabriella asked, sipping her coffee. Grant was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "The future," he finally said. Bernard Holloway was in town yesterday talking to some of the smaller ranchers about selling out to him. Gabriella tensed. "Do you think he's still planning something against us?" "Not directly," Grant assured her, "but he's expanding his holdings, consolidating power in the region. It could make things difficult for independent operations like ours in the long run." The casual hours sent a warm glow through Gabriella's chest. "We'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt. "The ranch is stronger now than it's been in years, thanks to you." Grant shook his head. "Not just me. Your father's knowledge of the land is invaluable, and you," he turned to face her, his eyes serious in the fading light, "you've been the heart of this place. I've never met anyone with your combination of strength and compassion." The compliment made Gabriella's cheeks warm. "I was just doing what needed to be done." "That's exactly it," Grant insisted. "While others talk about what should be done, you simply do it. It's rare, Gabriella, you're rare." The way he said her name, like a caress, made her heart race. They sat in charged silence for a moment, the space between them electric with unspoken feelings. "Why did you really help us, Grant?" Gabriella finally asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind for months. "The truth." Grant set his coffee cup aside, turning to face her fully. "The first reason I gave you was true. I believe in justice, in people having the right to choose their own path." He paused, seeming to gather courage, but there was more to it than that. "What more?" Gabriella pressed gently. "From the moment I saw you by that creek," Grant said, his voice low and earnest, "something told me you were important, not just any woman in trouble, but someone significant to the world, to me." He smiled self-consciously. "It sounds foolish saying it aloud." "It doesn't," Gabriella whispered, her heart in her throat. "Not to me." Grant's eyes searched hers, finding encouragement in what he saw. "These past months working alongside you, seeing your courage and determination, it's only confirmed what I sensed that first day. I've come to care for you, Gabriella, more than I should, perhaps, given our business arrangement." Joy bloomed in Gabriella's chest, bright and overwhelming. "I've come to care for you too," she admitted, "though I wasn't sure if you felt the same." Grant's smile was radiant in the gathering dusk. "I've been trying to be respectful. Your father trusted me with his ranch and his daughter's reputation. I didn't want to jeopardize either." "My father respects you," Gabriella said. "He told me so just yesterday. Said you were the kind of man he would have chosen for me if the choice had been his to make." Grant's eyebrows rose in surprise. "He said that?" Gabriella nodded. "He's changed these past months, we all have." Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, Grant reached for her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, strong yet gentle in its grasp. "Gabriella Montgomery," he said softly. "I came to Montana looking for work, not expecting to find a home. But that's what you and this land have become to me. I don't have much to offer beyond what you've already seen: hard work, honesty, and a heart that's entirely yours if you'll have it." Tears pricked at Gabriella's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming happiness. "That's all I could ever want," she whispered. "Someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession." Grant's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. In answer, Gabriella leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened, years of loneliness and months of unspoken longing pouring into the connection. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their foreheads touching as they savored the moment. "I love you," Grant murmured against her lips. "I think I have since that first day by the creek." "I love you too," Gabriella replied, the words feeling both new and familiar, as though her heart had known them all along. They might have remained there, lost in each other, had not the sound of approaching hoofbeats broken the spell. Reluctantly separating, they turned to see William riding toward the cabin, his expression urgent even in the dimming light. "Trouble," he called as he reined in his horse. "Just got word from town. Bernard's men have cut our fence line on the north boundary and driven off about 30 head of our cattle." Grant was on his feet immediately, the tenderness of moments before replaced by resolute determination. "When?" "Sometime this afternoon," William replied. "Sam Jenkins spotted them driving the cattle toward Double Circle land and rode to warn us." "We need to get them back," Grant said, already reaching for his hat and gun belt. "Tonight, before they can be mixed with Holloway's herd and rebranded." "I'll come too," Gabriella declared, standing. Both men turned to her with identical expressions of concern. "It's too dangerous," William began. "I know these cattle as well as either of you," Gabriella countered. "And I'm as good a rider. You'll need every hand you can get if we're going to recover them all before dawn." Grant and William exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Grant nodded. "She's right, and we'll stick together, no unnecessary risks." Within half an hour, they had assembled a small recovery party. Grant, William, Gabriella, and 2 neighboring ranchers who owed the Montgomerys favors. Armed and determined, they rode north under a rising moon, following the trail of the stolen cattle. The tracks led them across Montgomery land and into the disputed territory that formed the boundary with Double Circle Ranch. Here, the fence line had indeed been cut, the wire coiled neatly to the side in a way that spoke of deliberate action rather than random damage. "This wasn't rustlers," William growled. "This was Bernard sending a message." Grant's expression was grim as he studied the ground. "The cattle were driven east from here, toward that box canyon where Double Circle keeps its young stock. If we circle around through the high pass, we might be able to intercept them before they reach the holding pens." They rode hard through the night, the moonlight casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. Gabriella's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, the weight of her father's revolver unfamiliar at her hip. She had insisted on carrying it, despite Grant's protests, arguing that she needed to be able to defend herself if necessary. As they approached the canyon, Grant signaled for them to dismount and proceed on foot. The sound of lowing cattle echoed from within the stone walls, confirming their suspicions. "They're still here," Grant whispered, "probably waiting until morning to move them to the main herd." Peering around a boulder, they could make out 3 men lounging around a small campfire, rifles within easy reach. The stolen cattle milled in a natural enclosure formed by the canyon walls, already bearing temporary paint marks that would later be burned into permanent brands. "We're outnumbered," one of the neighboring ranchers murmured. "But we have surprise on our side," Grant countered. "And right," William nodded grimly. "Let's do this clean, no shooting unless absolutely necessary. We're here for our cattle, not bloodshed." The plan was simple. Grant and one of the neighbors would circle wide to block the canyon exit, while William and the other neighbor would approach the camp directly. Gabriella would stay with the horses, ready to help drive the cattle once they were secured. But plans, as Gabriella had learned throughout her life, rarely survived contact with reality. As the men moved into position, one of the stolen cattle, a nervous heifer, caught their scent and bellowed in alarm. The rustlers were on their feet instantly, guns drawn. "Who's there?" One called, peering into the darkness beyond their firelight. William stepped forward, his rifle steady. "William Montgomery, you've got my cattle, boys, and I've come to take them home." The standoff that followed was tense, neither side willing to back down. The rustlers claimed they were following Bernard's orders, that the cattle were payment for damages allegedly caused by Montgomery cattle crossing onto Double Circle land. "That's a lie and you know it," William replied evenly. "Those are my cattle with my brand." Paint marks don't change that fact. As the argument escalated, Gabriella grew increasingly uneasy. From her position with the horses, she could see what the others could not: a fourth rustler, previously unseen, circling behind her father with a drawn revolver. Without hesitation, Gabriella raised her own gun and fired a warning shot into the air. "Behind you!" she shouted to her father. The night erupted into chaos. The hidden rustler fired at William, the bullet grazing his arm. Grant returned fire, dropping the man with a shot to the shoulder. The other rustlers dove for cover, shooting wildly into the darkness. Gabriella's heart pounded as she crouched behind a boulder, the reality of violence far different from anything she had imagined. She could hear Grant shouting her name, panic evident in his voice. "I'm here," she called back. "I'm safe." The gunfight was brief but intense. When silence finally fell, one rustler lay wounded, another had fled into the night, and the remaining two stood with their hands raised in surrender. Grant rushed to Gabriella's side, checking her for injuries with frantic hands. "Are you hurt?" "When I heard the shot, I'm fine," she assured him, gripping his arms to steady them both. "I saw the fourth man sneaking up on Father. I had to warn him." Relief washed over Grant's face, followed by pride. "You saved his life." William approached, a blood-stained bandana wrapped around his upper arm. "That she did," he agreed, his eyes filled with gratitude. "My brave girl." Together they secured the surrendered rustlers and tended to the wounded man. By dawn, they were driving the recovered cattle back toward Montgomery land, tired but triumphant. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the territory. Bernard Holloway, faced with eyewitness accounts of his men's actions and the testimony of the captured rustlers, found himself in an untenable position. The local sheriff, long suspected of being in Bernard's pocket, was forced by public pressure to investigate the cattle theft. The incident marked a turning point in the power dynamics of the region. Other small ranchers, emboldened by the Montgomery stand, began to resist Bernard's pressure tactics. A coalition formed, with Grant often serving as spokesperson for their collective interests. For Gabriella and Grant, the aftermath of that night brought both challenges and joy. Their relationship, no longer hidden, flourished in the open. William gave his blessing, admitting that he had seen the attachment growing between them for months. "You brought life back to this ranch," he told Grant one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. "And more importantly, you brought life back to my daughter's eyes. I can never repay that debt." "There's no debt between family," Grant replied simply. The words hung in the air, full of meaning. Later that night, under a canopy of stars, Grant knelt before Gabriella with a small gold ring, modest but bright in the moonlight. "I can't offer you mansions or fine clothes," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "But I can promise you a life of purpose, of partnership, of love that grows stronger with each passing day. Will you marry me, Gabriella Montgomery?" Tears of joy spilled down Gabriella's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." Their wedding, held that autumn on Montgomery land, was everything Bernard Holloway's planned ceremony would not have been: joyful, unpretentious, filled with genuine affection rather than social obligation. Gabriella wore her mother's dress, lovingly altered by her own hands, and carried wildflowers gathered from the creek where she and Grant had first met. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint stewardship. William, reinvigorated by the ranch's revival and his new role as mentor rather than sole decision-maker, found purpose in teaching Grant the nuances of Montana ranching while learning modern techniques from his son-in-law in return. Bernard Holloway remained a powerful force in the territory, but the alliance of smaller ranchers proved more resilient than he had anticipated. Over time, a grudging respect developed between the former enemies, culminating in a tense but productive meeting where boundaries and water rights were formally established to prevent future conflicts. 5 years after that fateful spring when Grant had first ridden onto Montgomery land, the ranch house echoed with a new sound: the cries of a healthy baby boy. named William Grant Blackwood in honor of both his grandfathers. As Gabriella cradled their son, Grant sat beside her on the bed, wonder and love illuminating his face. "He's perfect," Grant whispered, gently touching the infant's tiny hand. "Just like his mother." Gabriella smiled tiredly. "Half you, half me, a true partnership." "The best kind," Grant agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Outside the window, the Montana landscape stretched vast and beautiful, the same land that had nearly been her prison, now the foundation of her freedom. As the baby dozed in her arms, Gabriella reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a bride sold to settle a debt to a woman who had chosen her own path, her own partner, her own life. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, noting her contemplative expression. "About hope," Gabriella replied softly. "About how sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to reach for happiness, even when it seems impossible." Grant's smile was tender as he gazed at his wife and son. "I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to ride out to that creek at dawn. And I'm grateful you were foolish enough to think you could save a woman and a ranch with nothing but determination," she teased gently. "Not foolish," Grant corrected, his eyes warm with love. "Hopeful. And hope, it turns out, is stronger than fear, stronger than duty, stronger even than the past." As twilight settled over the Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple, the young family remained together in peaceful contentment, their future as vast and promising as the frontier itself. The ranch that had nearly been lost now thrived, a testament to perseverance and partnership. And Gabriella, once promised to a man she could never love, had found in Grant not a savior, but an equal, a man who had offered her not security but freedom, not protection but strength, not ownership but love. Years later, when silver threaded their hair and their children had children of their own, Gabriella and Grant would still sit on the porch of the ranch house at sunset, hands clasped as they watched the Montana sky perform its nightly miracle. And sometimes, if asked about their beginning, Grant would smile that same dimpled smile that had first captured Gabriella's heart and say simply, "I had nothing to offer but hope. Thankfully, it was enough." And Gabriella, her eyes still bright with the same spirit that had given her the courage to choose her own destiny, would squeeze his hand and add, "Hope was everything. Hope is still everything." For in that vast Montana landscape, where promises had once been made without her consent, she had found the greatest promise of all, the promise of a life fully and freely chosen, with a love that had only deepened with each passing season. Through droughts and blizzards, through prosperity and hardship, through the births of their children and the inevitable losses that come with time, that original hope had never diminished. Instead, it had grown stronger, rooted in the land they shared and the life they had built together, a testament to the power of choosing love over obligation, courage over fear, and the uncertain path of freedom over the illusory security of a gilded cage.